Welcome, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Council of Institutional Investors' Voice of Corporate Governance, the number one best corporate governance podcast as determined by Million Podcasts. I'm your host, Jeff Mahoney, General Counsel of CII. Our topic for this episode is winning in the face of change. And my special guest today is Pat Niemann, leader of EY America's Center for Board Matters. Pat also leads the EY Audit Committee Forum and previously managed Ernst & Young LLP's Los Angeles office and audit practice. Welcome, Pat. Thank you for joining us today to discuss this timely topic.
Hello, Jeff, and hello to our audience. It's great to be with you all.
Pat, as many business leaders have said, change is really the only constant we can count on. Many also believe today's business environment feels more dynamic than ever, with many publicly traded organizations being touched by new technologies, laws, regulatory changes, and other global events. What we want to talk about today is how companies can navigate this change with agility and what role boards can play. First, let's level set the discussion. Pat, how do you define agility, and why do you believe companies need agility?
So, Jeff, that is an interesting question. It's a word I think many of us use regularly, but I must say the first time I've been asked to define it, so let me try. To me, agility is all about staying sharp, being ready to pivot when the business landscape shifts. It's about spotting changes that could affect the company and reacting swiftly to seize opportunities amid so much uncertainty that companies face today. I'll mention another word, nimble. Companies, I think, have always had to be nimble, but it feels like now more than ever, agility is key. And to me, there is a distinction. When I think nimble, I think able to act quickly with decisions, protocols in place to respond to the change. But when I think of agility, it's about adapting and responding in a more structured way. It involves collaboration of people, a collaboration of processes to a great degree, and it's often iterative. There's a lot involved. I do think that there is an unprecedented pace of change for companies, and the speed of change can certainly be daunting. So, Jeff, as you mentioned, when you think about things like new technologies, just think about how quickly technology is evolving, for instance, especially when you think about the rollout of newer AI models and capabilities. There's constantly something new on the horizon. So for some companies, these rapid changes are shaking up their strategic plans and forcing them to make quick pivots. It's not just a theory. We can see it in action every day with our clients. And you think about how technology impacts our daily lives, and we could just pick a favorite emerging technology. I already mentioned it once, AI. And every time we do an internet search, we shop online, even when we draft an email or text a friend, we're most likely interacting with AI in some way, shape, or form. So the two of us and our listeners, it's likely personalizing our shopping experiences, summarizing our search results, suggesting help with a draft. It's already becoming so integrated into our routines that we might not even notice it. And now we're moving into agentic AI, where AI systems can make decisions and take actions autonomously. With the rise of this technology, some companies are making significant changes. So, for example, think about how customer service has evolved. Many companies now use AI chatbots, resources. They handle customer inquiries. They free up human agents for more complex issues. Or you think about healthcare, where companies are using AI to analyze patient data, predict health outcomes. So, of course, the need to be agile goes well beyond technology advancements, but companies are certainly needing to and adapting to change across all kinds of dimensions. They're from economic disruption, changes in trade policy, vulnerable supply chains, and really many more instances. So they're adjusting financial strategies, they're adjusting their logistics, shifting their manufacturing operations to navigate new tariffs and so many other business challenges, and diversifying suppliers and increasing inventory. And it sort of goes on and on. But to me, to sum up the thought, when thinking about agility, the bottom line is that with today's pace of change, companies that can adapt and respond quickly and embrace the opportunities are the ones that'll thrive. And being nimble doesn't hurt either.
Pat, how does this agility imperative translate to the boardroom. What role does the board play?
For boards, when I think about agility and their roles and responsibilities, I think guiding an agile company requires a lot of flexibility and forward thinking and a much more dynamic approach to strategy setting. And while management sets the strategy, the board certainly plays a key and crucial role in oversight and guidance. And you could even think of it as coaching when you think about the resources and the talent and experience that boards tend to have at corporate and public companies. In a survey we fielded earlier this year, Jeff, with corporate board member, nearly 200 public company directors responded, and nearly three-fourths, 73% is the actual number, told us that their strategy is constantly evolving. And 6 in 10 expect to have a new strategy in 12 to 18 months. So, talked about the pace of change. There's also strategy shifts very, very quickly. Getting this right requires strong alignment between the board and management. There needs to be an understanding on how much risk the company should take and is willing to take. The board and management need to be on the same page about how much the company should play it safe versus taking bold steps to invest in new opportunities. With the directors we surveyed, 87% actually believe that their board and management team see eye to eye on risks. Still, a third of directors said they want management to take more risks and act more aggressively in alignment with the board's risk appetite. And to me, this is sort of fascinating and perhaps surprising to many. But stepping back from the data, I think it comes down to the decision-making and strategy horizon. This is where the board's longer-term perspective becomes crucial. Boards can elevate management's view beyond the short-term financial performance to set the company up for durable future success. For example, think about the pandemic. The companies that invested in digital transformation early on were much better positioned to thrive in the new remote work environment. And management teams may need more confidence and perhaps more support and more discussion with their boards in executing long-term choices where the benefit may not be realized immediately and there may not be a feel that management teams and companies are getting the credit from the outside world in the short term.
So, Pat, what advice are you currently giving boards on how to improve in their oversight of agility?
For starters, Jeff, boards really have to be on the same page around terms like agility. I said nimbleness. Resilience is another term that is often used and gets a good amount of attention. So when I think about the board discussions and where boards need to be, are we talking about being ready to bounce back to the baseline after a crisis strikes, for instance? Or is it more the ability to respond to the challenges in a way that transforms the company, takes the company forward to new and different levels? It's pretty crucial to get everyone speaking the same language and clarify the goal. So you can consider a scenario where a company faces a sudden economic downturn. And we know those happen. It's just a matter of when, not if. The board and management really need to be aligned on whether to make bold investments in new opportunities or to play it safe and cut costs. This alignment really is essential for making informed decisions that balance the risk and reward. And I'd point out that's shorter term and certainly longer term. Another area where the boards need to have consensus is around identifying the most important points of failure for the company and clarifying the risk tolerance for those points of failure. This is about identifying not just the top risks the company faces, but where it's most vulnerable. So, for example, imagine a company that relies on a single supplier for a key component. If that supplier faces a disruption, the entire production line could come to a halt. Or consider a company that depends heavily on a specific market for its revenue. If there is political instability or regulatory changes in that market, the company's financial performance could be severely impacted. And while these might be extreme examples and probably obvious and apparent to most of our audience, by identifying these choke points and agreeing on the risk tolerance, leaders, boards, and management teams can better prioritize where to allocate resources to mitigate the risk and build, I'll use the word resilience in the face of external shocks. Another area we're encouraging boards to focus is having a more dynamic strategy setting approach. I talked about earlier how many boards, the majority in our survey, plan to have a new strategy or a revised strategy within 12 to 18 months. So strategy needs to be discussed at multiple points during the year and embedded in conversations year round. It's not just an annual strategy retreat. It's not a point in time once a year or otherwise. There may be costs to inaction, obviously, or waiting too long to be assessing strategy and taking action on strategy. I think boards are in a good position to help management step back from the day-to-day or even year-to-year focus that management just has out of necessity in the environment in which they operate. The business never stops, but corporate directors are in a position to trigger reflection by senior management. So, as part of that conversation, I think it needs to include challenging the assumptions that underlie the strategy on an ongoing basis. Boards should be asking questions like, what must be true for our strategy to succeed? Or how might changes in the external environment impact our assumptions? Just a few thoughts in response to your question, Jeff.
So, Pat, let's dig into that last point some more. How should boards challenge strategic assumptions?
Identifying what must be true for a strategy to succeed can help leaders spot potential threats and plan how to respond to them. This can include scenario planning, but it's also about challenging the core assumptions on which the strategy gets built. Sometimes these assumptions may even be unspoken, like assuming that a growth strategy will work because customers will keep behaving the same way. But as things change, companies need to revisit and challenge these assumptions to stay on track. And with their boards, do it proactively, like I said, not once a year or once every so often, but on an ongoing basis. We can think about another real world scenario. Company in the packaged foods industry, their growth strategy hinges on the assumption that customers will continue to prefer traditional snack foods. However, what if new prescription weight loss drugs start altering the food tastes and preferences of patients, or even the amount of food they consume? Maybe people are less inclined to reach out for the bag of chips or a sugary snack. That might be good for our society, but it does change patterns and even revenues and so forth for companies. So if these drugs become cheaper and more widely used, think of the impact on the packaged food business. That could be significant. These companies are going to need to consider adapting their product lines to meet these new preferences, which could involve investing in research and development or forming partnerships with health and wellness brands. By continuing revisiting the challenges, challenging those core assumptions, companies can stay ahead of the curve and turn potential threats into opportunities. And while that's just one metaphor or example for the sake of discussion, it does point out to me that boards are uniquely positioned to guide management, to help them challenge as they consider the second, third, even fourth level impacts of forces that are disruptive in even adjacent to the company's industry, and to adapt accordingly. We've done future mapping exercises with directors that help them build this muscle by considering disruptive forces shaping multiple industries. For example, we'll take a prompt that envisions a future possibility like AI employees with full agency in the workplace, or fraud in financial and property transactions being eliminated by blockchain. And while those could be far-fetched and may not ever happen, taking that idea and having the directors brainstorm around the potential implications to the business, and then the potential implications of those implications, and so on. So leading boards are using this kind of future backwards strategy development to help themselves and help their management teams see around the corner. They're also overseeing management's approach to scenario planning and encouraging executive teams to test the impact of a wider range of geopolitical, economic, and other changes.
Pat, a perennial challenge for our audience of institutional investors is that they are generally not in the boardroom. So what should institutional investors look for as they seek to assess board quality and effectiveness related to agility?
Yeah, Jeff, that is indeed a challenge. And it's a significant challenge while at the same time investor engagement plays, I believe, a more significant role than ever in the corporate world, the capital markets, and even in the corporate boardroom. One place to start might be what boards themselves say are the keys to success. Another survey from Ernst & Young, we asked directors, what are your board's top 3 most important attributes that make it agile at anticipating and responding to change? And 3 answers stood out amongst others. The first, directors' skills and background expertise. 72% of directors that we surveyed viewed that as the most important attribute of effectively responding to predicted and unpredicted change. We know from our own conversations with investors that this is a key area of investor focus already. So understanding the relevance of director skills and expertise to the company, how the board is evolving over time, and what the board is communicating about the skills it needs and its approach to director succession planning. Those are really critical aspects. And I would add to that ongoing director education has a high level of importance. How is the full board upskilling on fast evolving topics that are impacting the business that may or may not be in every director's expertise, background, deep experience? The second area that directors identified in our survey as a key to success in boardroom culture, is there an atmosphere of constructive challenge and debate? Is every voice on the board heard in critical discussions? And the third and final that I'll point out to our listeners, the third area is directors' understanding of the business. Do directors have a deep understanding of the company's operation, industry, and competitive landscape? And when I think about that, Jeff, I think about through the investor lens, what discussions are investors having with boards and with corporate management about how boards and management teams are approaching that important element of board service. I recognize these are challenging factors to assess from the outside the boardroom, but particularly the culture of the board and director knowledge of the business. So there's no easy answer here, but these are the attributes that directors tell us are the keys to their success on overseeing agility. So to the extent that investors have opportunities to go deeper with boards in these areas via engagement and the company's broader communications, it may uncover valuable signals to consider.
Pat, this has been a very interesting discussion that I'm sure our listeners will find useful. I'm also sure that we could talk about this and many other topics that would be of interest to investors. We'll have to do this again sometime soon.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks to all in our audience. I've truly enjoyed the conversation. I hope that it resonates and absolutely would love to join you at another time in the future. So thanks again.
That concludes our podcast episode. On behalf of the Council of Institutional Investors, I want to thank my special guest, Pat Niemann, leader of EY America's Center for Board Matters. If you have any questions or comments regarding this podcast, please feel free to contact me at Jeff, that's Jeff, at CII.org. Until next time, I'm Jeff Mahoney. Thanks again for listening to the Voice of Corporate Governance.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Voice of Corporate Governance, brought to you by the Council of Institutional Investors. The Voice of Corporate Governance is a free, non-sponsored podcast that highlights critical developments in corporate governance and other important issues affecting institutional investors. The views expressed by those interviewed on the podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of CII or its members. For more information on CII and its policies on corporate governance, please visit our website at www.cii.org.